Welcome to the Learn, Grow, Teach, Parent podcast.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I've been out for a couple of weeks. I was viciously sick. As you guys know, I teach little kids, and somehow whatever gets them sick is lethal to anyone who's an adult. And I spent about 3 weeks resting my voice and resting my body. I did work a little bit, but I have a chance now to restart the podcast after a short break. And I've got an excellent guest. This is my friend, Coady. We have known each other for quite a while. He was my daughter's teacher, Annabella. You guys know a little bit about her. He is an excellent educator, and I admire greatly the path that his life has taken in becoming an educator. It's quite unique, and I hope you guys enjoy the podcast. So without further ado, Jared, how are you?
Doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think when I started doing a podcast like this, I said there were a few guests I needed to have, and you were number one. Because I've been talking with Jamie York a little bit, and he does a great job of talking about Waldorf education, but I don't consider Waldorf education without considering Jared Coady. It's you were the introduction to our family to it, and you are a superlative teacher and person. I really admire the way that your life is, the challenges that you've taken. I mean, when you became a teacher, you weren't even a teacher here in the United States. Didn't you have to go overseas and learn a new language to even become a teacher? Is that how, do I remember the story correctly?
That's similar to what actually happened, yeah. I was in Taiwan. I was there studying Mandarin, and long story short is I found myself going from really just trying to be a Mandarin student, self-studying a lot and teaching a lot of one-on-one. It was how I was able to support myself because I wanted to study language. And suddenly I was living across the street from a Waldorf school. I had never heard of that. And the people in my building that lived there, they were sending their children there. And pretty quickly they said, this is a place for you. I was also teaching yoga at the time. So I wasn't just doing yoga asana. I was also studying the yoga classics. So then when I ended up in the Waldorf school, it was recognized pretty quickly that I could understand the underpinning philosophy, so to speak. So I came in pretty strongly in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, learning Mandarin, okay, this isn't a common language that was spoken in the United States at that time. You uproot your life and go to a foreign country. You throw yourself into the deep end. I have to learn the language, but it's not enough to learn the language. I have to be a teacher bridge that gap. I mean, it's in many ways, the things that you do are like a judo flip. You take the hardest thing that they're throwing at you, and you just seem to be able to move and turn it into a power move on your side, which is really, I think, necessary for just teaching in general, but for Waldorf, it's super important to be able to adapt and grow as the children that you teach grow. Do you agree with that statement?
Adapting and growing as the children do? Yes, I do. And I think that you kind of just alluded to what's the most magical thing about it. It's the ability to see, perceive something that looks like a negative, something that looks like an issue, and find the essential gold in there. So there have definitely been times in my work and moments in my work where I consider it a kind of alchemy. Turning lead into gold, whether it's a child's difficulty in bringing forth that thing and turning it into a strength that could take the place of, very often that takes the place as something like, this child perceives they're not very good at something and I help them understand. If I become good at it, not only will I be good at that, but I will have also strengthened my forces of will. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's an important phrase. I mean, developing a child's will is at the core of the Waldorf Waldorf system. It's at the core anyway of the philosophy that drives it. I know that you're very much into anthroposophy, and that for you, that spiritual journey is an important one as a teacher. And then later on, it becomes important, not because you're teaching this to the child, but because you're using that centering point to be able to focus on what that child needs. You meet the child where they need to be met. And this is extremely antithetical to what I see in most public education. Do you think that having that advantage, having had this advantage so many years, is what gives you that unique insight?
Yes. Yes, it's a big part of it. I think that the biggest gift of anthroposophy in my day-to-day work with children is a growing perception of what's happening in the development of the child, which is definitely what you're asking me about. You can be very specific with it. Like people say things like, it's developmentally appropriate. And then you look at what's being done, it's actually very vague. There's no cognitive reason why the things that are being done or offered to the children are developmentally appropriate. But for example, if we look at the ages of 7 to 14, you can kind of see that what we're doing is we're building a throne for a sovereign to enter and take a seat at the age of 14. And if you look at what happens there, we're kind of trying to recapitulate all the things that human consciousness has gone through to lead us to the moment when we as, in the United States, in France, and other countries that had a revolution against an external sovereign. What was going on inside of the people at that time is they had said, we don't need an external sovereign anymore. We have an internal sovereign. So we're going to get rid of those people, and we ourselves are going to have democracy. And if you look at all the things that led up to that, all the classical civilizations that finally led up to what culminates in the Waldorf School in the 8th grade Age of Revolution, or the study of revolutions, it's really recapitulating that exact same thing. And it's saying, through the recapitulation of that, we build up a throne within the child by re-experiencing all the things that human consciousness has gone through as best as we can in a full-blown way. That means that they feel that. They feel like they're in Egypt for a moment. It's almost like a remembering. They feel like they are part of ancient Greece for a moment. They sing those songs. They speak in the classical language of it. They recapitulate all of that so that all the things that were built up in those stages of consciousness are built up within the child. And all of that leads to this moment of sovereignty when we then say, okay, here's the throne, sit down. And they have that moment of sovereignty, that where it comes into them, this aspect that's a little bit more of an individual than they've ever been before. Now, I will say, just because they're sitting at the throne doesn't mean, even when a young king becomes a king, they have a lot of advisors around them. And that's kind of the picture of the next stage when they go into high school. They still need trusted advisors who can work with them. But again, this is the thing. And if you've got to talk on the podcast about Waldorf education, this is really, to me, the essential imaginative description of why we say the authority of the teacher is necessary at this age of 7 to 14, because this external authority that we represent is leading them through those stages of consciousness to the moment when they get there at a certain degree, a significantly greater degree of their own autonomy and their own inner authority.
This is an excellent way to picture it, I think. I think you do a terrific job of, we want our children to have these Western ideals of, I want them to be able to think for themselves. I want them to be able to draw conclusions. I want certain things in their life to present them with a challenge that they are equipped to overcome and to, in one way or another, take them to the next level of growth. And obviously, that agency is tempered with lessons along the way. You don't immediately receive those things. In fact, most parents give authority to children way too early, way too early. They want to please them. They want them to be happy. Of course, I love my child. There's a confusion between restraining from that and allowing certain things to grow within the child. I think a lot of people they're hung up a little bit on the intellectual part of it, the smart part of it. Can they do math? Can they do these things? But you're getting to the heart of it. And in many ways, you're talking about 7 to 14, but you have in many ways prior to that had a life with them, because as a Waldorf teacher, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about how you developed that in the younger years?
So in the younger years, we're really developing the body. And the body's developed, and the body would include the senses. And it's developed really through imitation. But our conception, I think Piaget says the same thing. I apologize. I'm not too fluent in pedagogical theory outside of Waldorf and anthroposophical education groups. But I do believe that that's a pretty common conception, is that these children are imitating. But our idea of why they're imitating is a little bit different. We have a conception that there's a difference between an inanimate material thing and a material thing that is alive. And that there's a quality to a material thing that is alive, whether it's an amoeba or a human being. But there's actually a series of forces, formative forces, that cause that material body to grow, to heal, to reproduce. And because we understand this thing to be bound up with the material body, but not really of verifiable, quantifiable material substance, we have to find a way we can perceive that it exists through observation, and we can understand that it exists from people who have the ability to more directly perceive it. Then we need to have a way to say, okay, what is this body doing and where is it right now? This growth body, this formative body. I have to diverge just a little bit and explain that if you look at things that grow, if you look at things that have this quality, there's something that is rhythmic inside of that. So if you look at a plant, it's growing kind of rhythmic sets of leaves that are kind of recapitulating the same growth, and they may be changing and evolving just a little bit as they kind of come to the point of flowering. But basically, they're doing the same thing, and they're actually spiraling. And this spiraling rhythm appears also in all kinds of places. I just found out today that that even the neurological patterns within the brain have been shown verified to be in spirals, and that the blood in your veins also spirals through your veins. Liquids tend to move this way. And this rhythm is also very, very important, because you can see visibly in a plant. I remember the, what are they called? Cabbage palms in Miami. They're fantastic. Oh, yeah. And if you look at the stem of them, people like to shave off the lower. Naturally, the fronds, they just kind of fall down, and they kind of create like a blanket of dead leaves around it. But people like to shave them off. And when they do, you can see the stem just spirals right up. You have this rhythmic spiraling pattern as part of these beings, plants, that have a material aspect to them, but they have a very pure form of this growth body. And we imagine that, we believe that children before the age of 7, they're kind of in a state similar to this, where there's a lot of growth forces, there's the material body, and they're functioning under a high level of rhythm. And things that are external to them, also again, like a plant, are highly influential to them. And now wrapping back around to these growth forces at this age, we perceive that the growth forces are outside of them, so that they're not completely inside their body yet. So that you're actually, when you're around a small child, you will notice that they start to pick up and imitate things that you didn't think that they could have possibly perceived. So we actually perceive that there's a kind of a sphere around these young children, and they have some kind of perception in it. It's not like an omniscient perception, it's vague and dull, and that they can imitate out of that. Another thing that happens that kind of supports this conception is if you're around children this age, you can kind of sense that they kind of try and draw on your life forces a little bit, your formative forces. People who work around young children, they start to feel tired and they kind of feel like they need to protect themselves. It can make them moody and exhausted to be around that.
Oh yeah. You're hitting it on the head. I mean, I see this with the very, very little ones that I teach, how they're absolutely prepared to use imitation as a form of learning. Or a form of, well, a way of forming themselves, a way of creating something around them that we would consider it, like when you're an adult and you say, oh, I've had a productive day. It's because you did something on a list, or however you manage that. It's a little bit more intellectual. Whereas they absolutely feel like they had a productive day. And you can see it when you come back and they want to repeat it. They want to do it again. They want, let's do this again. I repeat my class with these children. It doesn't matter if they're on the spectrum, which I teach a great deal of them. I was telling you before we got on that 40% of the kids I'm teaching are autistic. Yet when they take these classes, they're picking things up that all the kids are picking up with equal measure and to an equal degree. Whereas they may not be able to show that in math or in writing, some other intellectual task. They're definitely picking it up.
Yeah.
Physically on the rhythm. I see a manifestation of what you're saying, and I realize you're talking a little bit more spiritually about what's going on with them. But it definitely manifests. You see it. You can tell. Just like you can tell a plant is sick, by the way, it's not growing right. You can tell when kids aren't getting what they need to be healthy, to become healthy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, as someone who's teaching music, how do you perceive these children as receiving, especially rhythm? Because it's not just their inner rhythms, it's the outer rhythms, and it can happen in music.
Yeah, it's not just oral. It's happening everywhere. Their bodies are feeling. And they are, it's just amazing, because that is their music education is about rhythm. It's about starting and stopping. It's about listening. It's about being able to mimic what I'm doing. I'm doing the whole class. I'm not telling them, now do this. In fact, there's very little instruction in what I do. They pick up what I'm doing. And it escalates a little bit. Certain skills are ones they can have, and certain ones are ones they do not. But all of it is designed to put it in their body. It's not, they're not thinking about this thing. They are feeling this thing. And it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, that's how I'm teaching Mandarin right now. I'm back to teaching Mandarin again, and especially the ones that they've just come out of the kindergarten. I can still harness these so-called imitative forces. I can give them whole chunks of language and move their bodies so that they understand this very, very different foreign language gradually. I will say that one of the very beautiful things about teaching this language is, or foreign language at all, is it gives the children the need to be able, at a very early age, to be able to say, I don't know yet. And that's okay. Because I'll teach them whole verses in kind of a rhythmic or musical way. And then over time, piece by piece, I get them to understand more and more what that actually means. And in the meantime, and it can be years, they have to feel okay with a partial understanding. Yeah, I think that what you described is like a full environmental experience. I think this is one of the best ways to teach.
Absolutely. You have to teach every little bit. In fact, a lot of what you did when you did math with the older ones, of course, now we're talking about when we get to that 7 to 14 range, where you are now intentionally doing something different. But you're still using rhythm. You're still using, if I remember, mathematics had a lot of beating of sticks or manipulation of an external. You're forced them to do more than one thing at a time, which is what we begin to do as well. When we are teaching, using manipulatives like scarves or sticks or shakers or whatever musical instrument they can handle at that age, they're all precursors to ultimately picking up an instrument, because they have to do two things bilateral, and that is an instrument. An instrument is you are taking your body, splitting it down the middle, and you do one thing with one hand, another with the other. But you are always, the input is never independent, it's always holistic. You're getting all of it, because you know what it's supposed to sound like when it's complete. So I find that very interesting. But I think your description of giving them a sovereign it's excellent. Because don't you we ultimately want someone to have that authoritative voice be their own. They have to, but that doesn't happen because they're good or bad. That happened because it was intentional. You developed in them. You gave them the steps to get there.
Right. Yeah. I think an accessible way for a lot of people to relate to this is to just ask yourself, the voice in your head, whose is that? A lot of times you'll say, oh, there's mom, there's dad. And that's what they did. And they did it without knowledge. A lot of times you'll still meet people who they pretty directly understand that. But kind of instinctual parenting, it's really been diminishing in its clarity. The instincts have just been kind of fizzling out for a long time. You can hear 3 or 4 generations back that people had a lot more clarity about what to do, what not to do, what to say to children, what not to say to children, and that it's becoming less and less clear to people. And what that means is we have to have a very clear understanding of what's really happening in the development of the human being to know how to do the right thing at the right time, so that when the child leaves home, they have an inner voice that came about at this age before the age of 14 to direct them. And if you're asking your child to make decisions before they're ready to do that, you're actually taking away. It's one of those opportunity cost situations. Not only have you not put in the positive of your authoritative voice and modeled for them how a decision was made, you had a child who really didn't have the capacity to do that, try to do it. They were expending forces of, I guess, what a lot of people would be calling executive function. We know this doesn't really come into play till not in a strong way till the early to mid 20s. And you're having them utilize what might be forces, they're kind of casting out what would be forces of imitation, forces of growth, forces of healing, and they're putting them aside, and they're calling upon forces that they need much later in life. So they've actually usurped what they were supposed to be developing and put in the wrong thing. It's really, I think that the compound negative effects of this tendency to try to get children to think critically too early, to get children to think analytically, to be able to conceptualize things too early, to make decisions for themselves too early. I think the negative effects, it's far beyond what's easy to understand unless you're working with children over a period of time, the same children, like a parent does or a Waldorf teacher does. Only then can you get clarity of of what the real effect is on this. But I do want to say that it's not that you need to wring your hands and worry, oh, did I ask the child a question I shouldn't have? It's okay. It's okay here and there. It's this kind of systematic, this attitude of trying to bring them, as an adult, they have to get to this point. They have to be able to make these decisions eventually. They have to be able to have executive function and all those things. And just trying to shortcut that in a kind of systematic way is what is really essentially detrimental.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. The biggest mistake that we see parents make is where they apply certain things that they have not yet worked through in their own lives. And now they are forcing this on the child. And it's it's a cliche in some ways, but it manifests in, in trying to look out for someone. You actually do more damage than by deeply understanding the truth of the relationship. There needs to be a relationship there, but I think it's much slower, much prolonged. And I had that in my youth. You might have had that yourself to some extent. But I can tell you that I was born in 1964. So the world was vastly different. It wasn't more or less of anything. It was just different. But it wasn't different in the sense that we lived in neighborhoods or that we had to eat or that the main things were going on. But it was different dynamically in the household. There were certain systemic things that changed the family in a way that I really don't recognize the modern family in many ways. I just do not recognize what parent. Most parents you're in middle school and okay, they're on their own practically, and that's when they need you most. I think that's when you're solidifying that voice that you're talking about. Of course, by the time you get to high school, you don't want to baby them, but certainly you want to remain an authority that they can come to and ask questions because they haven't seen everything. They're not even close, right?
No, they're not even close. And that goes back to that, the sovereign can take the throne, but needs a bunch of advisors. Even our presidents, they still do this, they surround themselves with advisors. They can't handle the whole thing by themselves, not for a long time.
Yeah.
Me personally, I was still calling my mother regularly when I did not have the self-sovereignty to manage a situation. I mean, probably right up to age 30, I would still call her and sob, basically.
This is true. My son Michael is 30. He recently got married. And one of the conversations I had that parallels this is I told him, I said, look, you're the king of your house now. That's you and your wife having a life. Don't enmesh other people in it. That needs to develop. Just like all the other things in your life develop. Your marriage together, your life together now. You need to determine things. But it's your life. That doesn't mean you don't come to me for advice. It doesn't mean that I'm not there to support you. But I think that's the real next step that you're talking about in adulthood is where someone can honestly take complete control of their life. And some kids, if they're not ready at 30, they're not ready at 30. They can be ready a little bit later. It's no big deal as long as a parent is there or an advisor is there. Because there's someone is there.
Yeah, and I think what's one of the things that needs to be happening along the path from pretty early on in the grade school, all the way up to the time that you're talking about, Michael's facing right now is what I would call the right to fail. The right to fail.
Great. That's great. Yes.
The children really need this. They need people, watchful eyes with foresight and wisdom to say, that's okay. You can fail on that one. I can see how that's going to work out for you in the long, medium, or short term that you're going to fail on this. And that's okay. We don't need to stop them every single time they're faced with failure. They need that very, very much. Otherwise, if you're kind of hovering over them all the time, trying to make sure that they can't fail, and then you release them in this university track or into the professional track, and they've kind of had you overseeing them, making sure that they didn't fail. Now there's been no resistance training for failure. There's been no, getting down and picking yourself back up. There's been no experience of, when I fail, there is the possibility to do some alchemy and turn, lead into gold. And, so.
Absolutely. That's a big thing. These children today, they do not know how to fail because it's confusing. You sound wise when you say, oh, but failure is where you get your lessons or this other stuff. But then the pressure to do well is so high in the modern school system that it's disjointed. There's no truth to what they're saying because their actions don't match the words. I'm talking about the adults now, not the kids. They tell them, no, but you can fail. But, kids who get B's feel like they're not going to get into college. You're going to live under a bridge. They're not going to have a job. The idea of what failure looks like isn't talked about enough. It's not really defined properly. Now, obviously, I do that for my girls, and I did that for Michael as well. Defining what failure looks like and what getting up from failure looks like. And you want to talk about modeling. You really have to do that as a parent. Because in your own life, you must fail in front of your kids. You must get up and you must keep going. Otherwise, it's not real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you agree?
One of the things I like to say to my children when they say, I can't, I say, you mean you can't yet. There's another word there. I think it relates to what you're saying. You didn't fail until you stopped trying, right? So it's a matter of yet. Keep doing it. You'll be okay.
Yeah, you want to teach kids that the process is important, but let's face facts. Some outcomes are important, and outcomes are determined by your actions. But you must not. It's the amount of weight that you give an outcome. I think that's the problem. Because if you can only have one outcome and you cannot see any other outcome, the stakes are too high, and then the failure is impossible to get beyond. Because at that point, the outcome becomes more important than anything else. And I think that's what grades have done to kids. And that's also what getting.
Yeah, but I think that the premise of what most schools are doing from the kindergarten up also is overly determined about what the goal is. There's this kind of culture of preparation, right? If you don't do this in kindergarten, you're not prepared for first grade. Prepare for first grade? You don't have to prepare for first grade. But then it just, and that's absurd right there. And when, as they get older, it starts to look more and more reasonable. But in a way, I think that we could investigate and really reconsider this whole idea, this whole culture of education as preparation. It's the opposite of preparing children for freedom, right? We're taking our experience as adults and we're saying, we know that in order to meet the goals that may be hidden to us, the goals that we value but may be hidden to us, in order for you to meet those goals, you will have to be prepared in all of these ways. So we're actually taking the past and we're imposing it upon these children instead of saying, these are all the things that are hindering a free future. Let's remove those. Let's let education be about removing your hindrances from a future of freedom. That's a big paradigm shift.
And that's a really great way to put it. That's a beautiful way to disentangle this web that we're in, because if you don't do exactly what you just said, then I think people are hungry for redefining certain things. And then they're redefining them incorrectly. They're finding fault in some of the milestones that are necessary, and therefore they're removing them. It's kind of like what California did recently about removing math as a measuring stick for certain things. I think that when you get into removing them for the wrong reason, now you've taken a wrong turn. But it all boils back to what you originally said, which is that how they form is more important than the milestones that are imposed by well, I did it, so you got to do it. And then how far back do we go in pushing that agenda forward? How little of the child is left when they're mimicking what we're doing when they're young, and then they're mimicking what we want as they get older. There's no autonomy. There's no self.
Yeah. And the absurd conclusion of a culture of preparation is it continues to carry into, college, and then your work life. And then that's preparation for getting married. And that's preparation for having children. And all that's preparation so that you can retire. All you were doing since you were born is preparing to die. So that's not really, I think, what much of anybody wants to prepare their children for is death or retirement. I think that most people want their children to live beautiful, free lives. So again, I think that we need to be careful of the burden of the past and putting that burden upon children. It is antithetical to take the past and impose it on the children and expect them to move into a future that is one of their own making. We're also, when we do that, we're also kind of locking society and culture into a certain rigidity, a certain predetermined direction. Over and over and over again, each individual family, each individual parent is doing this instead of saying, well, if we free up all these children to do what they would naturally do. This is much more in the so-called American entrepreneurial spirit that we say has, and I believe is true, has made America, the United States, successful in so many ways. It's much more supportive of that aspect of our culture to try to remove hindrances and make them free for the future without imposing our baggage on them. That's what it really is.
Yeah, I think this is a beautiful point, that education doesn't have to be preparation of the person. Yeah, I might need completely different things, and this is when you're working with kids that are on the spectrum. You don't have the same rules. Don't apply for them. They're much freer, and it shows in the lives that they live, because somehow they're unshackled from this. I mean, human beings are awful at predicting the future. We're not good at it. They're not. Try to determine anything. Even the most educated people, they can't predict anything. I mean, take even recent events like COVID, or take inflation, or just even the most learned professionals in that, they couldn't have predicted any of that stuff. Life is unpredictable in that sense. So to then impose some sort of predictability into the future, I think weakens what you're doing, which is this unraveling and strengthening of what is inside. And as you apply it to, Western ideals, American ideals, I think, yeah, we'll be better off when we have those type of people. Booker T. Washington was like, do you know a little bit of Booker T. Washington, a slave? By any means, he didn't have a future or an outcome. Yet somehow he's able to observe opportunity at the right time and get into the right places to where he lifts himself out of slavery. He lifts himself out of illiteracy. And he somehow was able to start a university for Black people, Tuskegee University. And then he has the ability to say, look, even if I educate you, I don't know anyone's going to hire you. I don't know. This is what the way the world is, right? I don't know that you're going to get a job just because I give you an education. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to also give you a skill. And most of these people that went to this university, they needed to be able to, I don't know, be a farmer, a carpenter, a plumber, have a trade. All right. So welcome back. Here's what happened. We had a little technical glitch, and I'm recording the second part of this. We got cut off when I was having my little story about Booker T. Washington, which I love to tell. But overall, I think we got through that point. And I was very interested in hearing a little bit more about what you're doing recently. Can you tell us a little bit about the school you're at now and some of the things that are catching your attention? Let us know, Jared, what's happening with your life most recently, and what are you most excited about?
So I have worked prior to the school I'm at, I've worked in 3 different developing schools. And where I am now, it's basically back home. I grew up in Oklahoma City. Now I'm in Norman, Oklahoma. And when I came back from Taiwan as a Waldorf teacher, I wanted to come back here and bring this education to Oklahoma. I thought that would be just a really wonderful gift. And in a way, I feel a little bit of I guess, actually, I would say a very strong calling to do that. And then picked up my life, picked up my family, and came here, which has worked out beautifully. Now, I'm a Waldorf teacher. There's a kind of adjacent type of program to Waldorf early childcare education, and it's called Lifeways. And the school I'm at is, it's a Lifeways school. It's a kindergarten that has been there for 15 years. It's right on Main Street in Norman, Oklahoma, between the University of Oklahoma and I-35. So it's in this beautifully accessible spot. We have before I got here, this EC program had been holding waiting lists for a long period of time. They own their property. They had a whole bunch of pieces that just said, that's a really good way, a good place for me to go and try to bring Waldorf education. We had a stable kindergarten foundation to build upon, but it wasn't a regular Waldorf kindergarten. Lifeways differs a little bit from Waldorf education in that there's a little less emphasis on the kind of the visual arts stream. They still paint and they still do crafts, but maybe that's not the focus in the same way. And nature is a big focus. That's the same too, but I think it's a little bit bigger of a focus. So it's kind of just turning the dials on those two things. But I think that the thing that's really unique about Lifeways is a very hands-off kind of approach of teaching for the kindergarten teachers. And what that looks like is they work. And the children in this imitative state choose to work alongside them, or they don't. And that's okay too. Now, if they're not working alongside them, and that could be chopping vegetables, that could be cleaning, that could be sweeping, any number of things that they just naturally do if they see the adult who's their caregiver do that. They might join in, or they might free play. Now, here's another very interesting thing that our teachers in Lifeways know is when they do their work, their adult work, when they do that with joy, the children who choose not to join in with that play beautifully. Whereas what we've seen with children who feel that they're being observed in their play is a lot of cantankerousness and argumentativeness and fighting, and then a lot of demand of the teachers to kind of solve their social problems. And I really don't want to misrepresent the Lifeways program at all. They have the morning, they have the circles, they sing, they do puppet shows, they have the full spectrum of all that work. But that robust amount of playtime that's so necessary for the EC children, it kind of has this other emphasis about, the teachers are working and the children are playing, which is their work, or they're entering into the work of the adult, which is just a form of play for them. For them, there's no differentiation between work and play. And actually, I would end by saying, in this introduction, the healthiest adults don't really have a differentiation between work and play either. Yeah, we have to grow through that, right? We have a period of time where it's, and I have to work. But if we do really well in our lives, then we can start to say, all my work is done joyfully. My work is also play. I'm not there all the time, but coming to this program has been healing for me, and that I've been able to move in that direction quite a bit for me personally.
I think that's great. I mean, a lot of what you're saying is absolutely true. Children, when they're being observed, like being watched by a teacher, be watched by a caregiver, they tend to try to fall into some sort of expectation. Or I think the most realistic thing that we see is when the children argue with each other and they don't have the skills to resolve those matters. They definitely look to the adult in the room to either place blame or praise or fix that situation. Whereas there's no need for it if instead what you see is just someone living their life joyfully. It's very hard to accomplish that without a model. Do you agree?
I do. And think of what it means. Think of how different it is to grow up around an adult who sighs and gets ready for work in the morning and hustles around and is kind of moody and short. And then they go off to work and they disappear. And then they come back at the end of the day and they're not very happy about it. And they look forward to the weekend and their time off so they can just relax and play and be a little bit free. Now, that's one thing we could model to the children. And I would guess that those children are going to grow up and have the same relationship to work. Or we can model joyful engagement with our daily tasks. And I think that those children have a much, much greater possibility of growing up to be adults who enjoy their daily tasks. And I think that if you ask parents, what do you most want for your children? Aside from what I was talking about earlier, is kind of like a free determination of their future, they would say, I'd like my child to be happy. And I think this is one of the easiest ways to do it. And if you as an adult cannot get to the point of joyful engagement in your daily tasks, find a Lifeway center. They're everywhere. And
Yeah.
And
I
actually,
see that too.
I want to bring this back to you. I spent a lot of time when I was Annabella's teacher. I spent a lot of time in your kitchen, and I see your family as having done this very, very successfully. You and your daughter spent a lot of time in the kitchen together, taught her to cook. She loves cooking. She went on. That was something that a father and a daughter bonded on in a healthy, joyful way. And as soon as she had this sovereign sit down and she went into high school, she immediately started to apply that in the way a sovereign would. She said, the people around me are suffering. They need better food. And she started a program at her school. It's very impressive. I don't know if you've gotten to brag about her on your podcast, but I'll just go ahead and do that for
you. I appreciate that. Well, you were the impetus also, because when in 8th grade, you did a wonderful thing with the class where you said, hey, you got to master something. And in order to do that, you have to spend some time. You pick what it is, but find a mentor. Don't just try to learn it on your own. When you unravel that, there's so many wonderful things that go into a project like that. And of course, for Annabella, the outcome was extremely successful. I think most of the kids that were in the class had the same measure of success with their own little projects, even if they didn't have the same life that Annabella had. They had the same success. You were the impetus for that. So if you're tooting Annabella's horn, you're one of the little.
I just said there's the horn. That's all I did.
That's please. No. You took a very mature approach to giving them autonomy in a way that they could handle. One thing I do talk about on my podcast a lot is that circle of, in your life, you have to be a novice at something. You have to completely be bad at it and be willing to, in public, not look polished and good, but show that you have an effort and show that you have a good attitude towards it. You just have to be willing to learn something previously you did not know, master it. Then you've got to become somewhat good at it, and you got to find a competitor. I don't look at it as a rival or as a competition. It's just someone who drives it. Someone who says, hey, I'm as good as you are. Look how I got a little better. And look how, you did that. Well, I want to do that. And then it's a healthy competition. And then you got to do what Annabella did, which is I've mastered this. Now I'm the mentor. I'm going to find people. And I'm going to be a teacher and a leader. And I'm going to learn how to do that effectively. patiently well. And you model that for a lot of the kids. You really did. I mean, one of the things I can say is that um, you weren't very comfortable with music, maybe with a flute, but certainly not with singing. That was not your comfort zone. But I'd like you to tell the audience a little bit about that evolution for you, because you're in a weird place now with that. What are you doing with singing?
What am I doing with singing right now? Well, one of the things that our school, we really want it to be a full-blown community that meets the cultural needs on every level, anything that we can offer. And one of the things that I help initiated with the father is a men's group. I think it's really important. I think that the place of men, we're in a golden moment where different men and different groups of men are going to take the same moment and they're going to have really different results. Because of the rightful tearing down of the old status and position of men in the culture, the meaning of masculinity could be very lost. It could be very confused. Men could get in a struggle to try and regain that. Men could say, actually, this is very freeing. Let's find out what the actual gestural essence of masculinity is. And that's what we're doing. And we're reading a book together. It talks kind of about this, the mature masculine. And I just recognized in the group early on, there's a lot of musicians in here, a lot of musicians, some pretty good ones. And at first I kind of went about it the wrong way. I thought, I had a kind of a journey in my mind where I thought, all these musicians, this is going to get dominated by musicians, and this is going to kind of become like a music men's group. And I thought, well, we should try and make sure other men, other fathers in the community are brought in, and this is more balanced. And then I thought, why would you do it that way? This is the strength of the group. And so I talked to one of the fathers who's very musical, and we talked about how men's voices aren't really celebrated. And in a way, culturally, in this moment, in light of the changes that I just spoke of, men, to a great degree, have lost their voices. If you look in pop culture, the natural, deep male voice, not to say all male voices are super deep, but what we tend to have, it's not celebrated. The pop musicians that are males, they sing at a much higher register than most of us can easily. So we kind of took all this and put it together, and we said, let's sing together. And we've been singing together every Monday in a 4-part. It's actually an old monastic song. And it's really fun. It's 3 parts. It's not 4 parts. And it's kind of a very glorified Alleluia. And there's a place for everybody's voice, and we harmonize together, and we can hear each other. And, we're gearing up to very possibly sharing that with the community. My students' class play is coming up on December 19th, and the jury's out, but we are open to sending everybody off into Christmas break with this, or winter break with this, having our voices resonate in their ears. And we think that it would be just fantastic to show the children, a group of men who care enough to get together on their own time and sing together, and aren't afraid to stand in front of everybody and just belt it out.
This is great. I love this. I'm a big male advocate, men's advocate. The truth is, the overcorrection you're talking about, where there, for a long time it was just inequality when it came to certain opportunities for women, and in education as well, we just overcorrected for it, and now we've lost sight of men and boys and men. It's not that they're behind; it's that we overcorrected. So we have to move that back. We have to shift that back to the right place. And you're right. There's some redefining that goes into it, but I think the way you're kicking it old school, the way you're going back to how male and male voices should be archetypally represented in whatever register is the most comfortable. That, in a way, is an allusion to what's needed with boys, is they need to find something that isn't a mimic, but it's authentic. No cosplay involved in it, but is authentic. And you only find that authenticity in a space where you're allowed to be yourself. And so a men's group is a perfect way to do that. Men's, boys, we need that. It's an overcorrection from one side. It's good to bring it to this other end because I think it's healthy and necessary. And I'm glad to hear you're singing.
Yeah. And, I like singing, but like you said, when I first became a teacher and I found out I was going to need to sing, I thought, really? And I did it, and I've grown into it. But I will say, as a male teacher who has really worked, in my current faculty, I am the only male. And back when I was in Miami, I was one of a few. You were with us there for a bit. And every school before that, we were always the minority. So to sing with children who are an octave up, women who's even if they're singing on the same kind of register as you, there's just qualities of the voice that are kind of confusing if you're just in that environment and you're a man, because I can't quite tell which aspects of my voice are just the innate aspects of it and when I'm actually off key when I'm in a group of women. It's very hard for me to tell that.
Yeah, I think that finding your voice is a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor for discovering and reinventing and going to a new place. I love that you're doing that. And I think, both of us being males in early education is rare. But I do think we've got to figure out a way to model that for a new generation of young men. Because even if you come in and it's not going to hurt you to work with kids when you're young. In fact, it's a lot easier to work with kids when you're young. It's certainly preparatory to a life that you may want, but we need to teach it properly. You can't teach male teachers how to mimic female teachers mimicking what children need. It's got to be more authentic, more real.
Yeah, and to be
and
that,
I know that's a big discovery for you.
But to be that, we have to know who we are authentically. And I think as a gender group, we kind of don't right now.
I tend to agree. That's why online so many charlatans and so many people can come out and say something, because something needs to be said, right? You have to say something. You have to acknowledge that there's an overcorrection that went on. That doesn't make an enemy of another gender. That simply says, okay, this is the space that they're occupying now. So I got to find my space to occupy. And there are plenty of examples of how to do that and maintain your masculinity and how to, find a way to authentically be yourself. But this is something that was taken away from us as well. In antiquity, older brothers were celebrated. Men were celebrated. And because they knew that the potentiality of being shipped off the war was high. So while you had them, they were celebrated. They were given a position, certainly not the patriarchy that people think about, but they were given a certain quality within whatever society happened. And if you happen to survive war and move forward, you reap the benefit of having grown as a man in that direction. But now I think it's more of a spiritual battle that men have. They have to physically be able to handle certain things. You have to know where you sit in responsibility and handle that with grace and with strength and with power and authority. But you also have to be a lead. You have to be able to lead, and that there isn't enough spirituality that men achieve and then are able to say, well, I can now provide this to the people that are most important in my life. I think we give them far too materialistic goals. Oh, get a good job. Oh, now I can provide. Oh, be responsible. Okay, now I can be a husband or a father. But unless you really develop a spiritual understanding of what, and If you're uncomfortable calling it spirituality, you can call it wisdom, but you need to accomplish that. You have to have that factor where you're guided by something, an ideal or a spirit or someone better than yourself to become that for someone. Do you agree with that?
Yes. And on so many levels, I agree with that. And I really want to add for men, I think be vulnerable, like really be vulnerable. Like in a way, if we're saying before that this growing up has to do with being a sovereign, in a way, becoming a man, one of the tasks is taking off your armor. The warrior, you just said it, that time is, it's not completely over. There are areas in which we're warriors in our lives, but especially around those around us that don't want us to be warriors, take off your armor. And what I mean by that is we do so many complex, convoluted things to protect our essential selves. We don't really need to. We learn to do that through the trials and the vicissitudes of life. Those are maladapted protections. At one point in your life, perhaps you were picked on, you were spoken to poorly, and you developed sarcasm, or you developed a type of aggression, or any number of things that you use to protect yourself, and those become maladapted. I believe that there's an essential, I don't feel it's even a belief. I feel it's observable. There is an essential you, and you can't find it till you strip off all that armor and get really, really vulnerable. And when you do, it's really empowering because everybody around you, for one, you'll realize yourself, there was nothing that could be hurt in the first place. And the people around you will see you do that, and they'll feel a certain light shining from you, and they'll want to also take off their armor. They'll want to put forth that same type of light. It's one of the most inspirational things that we can do. And I obviously am speaking from, personal growth and recent experience that I've been able to do this more and more. In community building, it's been the most powerful thing that I can do, is to just show myself.
I'm happy for you. I think you're hitting it right on the head there. And I think there's a place for doing this. I think men's groups are a place for doing this, for showing vulnerability. There's a necessity, a rite of passage that has to occur so that you can see what it looks like to be vulnerable and to be, let's say, challenged, but to come out of it without harming yourself psychologically or physically. So only other men can teach that to you. Now, once you have that and you're capable of doing that, you can bring it into the other relationships in your life, and especially your children, because vulnerability, you're never more vulnerable than you are with your children. You may be that way with a spouse, a girlfriend, or someone else that you're with, but your children require vulnerability in you as a man, 1,000%. If you don't have it, then they will call it out. They know they're not getting you. And this is where these attachments that occur, these love attachments that occur, just these attachments that occur between children and parents go awry because they don't get to see what that really looks like. They don't get to see what failure really looks like, and getting up really looks like, or being wrong and admitting it really looks like, or being right and gracious looks like. You have to show these things, and you have to be able to do that with children. I think before you can do it with the other adults in your life. The other adults in your life, they have far too much going on in their own lives and pains that they misread it. They don't read it properly. Like you said, sarcasm and humor can be grossly misread to the wrong adult. Kids get it. Kids get it because they just see you being you. Do you feel like this move to Oklahoma and the stage of life that you're at, do you feel like it's the most authentic Jared that you've come across?
Yeah, and it so far, and I think there are more layers to peel off of that onion. But in a way, it's very fitting. I kind of have a little bit of a storyline that's very kind of dramatic. I'll share it with you. It's funny.
Okay.
You know, if we think of an epic story like Gilgamesh or the Bhagavad Gita or something like this, is representing a transformation in human consciousness. And I don't know if everybody perceives it that way, but I think if I suggest to you that it does, and you go back and you look at them again, you'll think, yeah, I can see what he's talking about. So let's just take that for granted in this conversation. And the Odyssey, right? This is so amazing. I left Oklahoma. I didn't want to. I never wanted to. I just really couldn't. I kind of wasn't a man. I couldn't really take care of myself, and I didn't really have any direction or any reason to be here. And if I wasn't a man, doesn't sit well with your listeners, and I wasn't an adult. And I left, and then I got initiated in the way that people get initiated. And you know, in these epics, you go on a journey, and then there's some kind of guide that presents themselves. And I was presented with the guide of Waldorf education and anthroposophy. And then I continued on my journey. And when I was in Miami, I was subbing for another teacher, or I was training a teacher, I think. And I was teaching their Odyssey block, and I was helping with their play. And I was teaching them the Odyssey in ancient Greek, the prologue, which I love doing. I love to learn some ancient language and learn how to speak that with a pretty authentic accent and really speak that with the children. I think it's wonderful for them and for me. And I was teaching it to them, and I got to the part in the story where Odysseus returns to Ithaca after 15 years, and I think he kneels on the shore and kisses the ground, and he's so happy to have returned home. And in that moment, it flashed. 15 years, that's how long I've been away from Oklahoma. I'm going home. I'm Odysseus.
I love that. Absolutely. Not just because Juliet is studying that. So I've reread the Odyssey recently and had multitude of discussions about that. But you're right. There's an almost Joseph Campbell need to not resist the pull of something, that human condition, that classical human condition. Yeah, and you're Odysseus in other ways too, because you've had to travel far and away and long for things. I mean, you went as far as Taiwan. Think about that. You didn't just leave Oklahoma. You left the West. You went on a true journey of where you had to confront difficult things. I mean, your own making, you did it to yourself, right? You moved away in order to get to that space.
Yeah, that's right.
Is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with, or talk a little bit about why you think the current state, what's the most needed thing in the current state of education? I know I'm putting you on the spot, and you might have to untangle that a little bit, but give me your thoughts.
I think it's love. And it does go back to the last point that I brought up about vulnerability, because if you're not being vulnerable, if you're shrouded in all kinds of different psychological machinations, then your true love essence can't come through. You can't be with other people. You can't hear them, not in an authentic way. You can't know them. You can't know about your children. You can kind of fake those things. Like you can know, like, I should listen to other people. Do you hear that? Do you hear their essential beings? Do you hear their needs? Do you hear their disappointment and their wants? And can you penetrate that and see into what's underneath those feelings, because a child can't. A child can't penetrate through and know that, they're disappointed because of some, I don't know. I have a child right now who it's all about his confidence, all the things he's doing. It's about his confidence, but he can't really see that. If I talk to him about it, he's a little older. He's about to be 12. If I talk to him about it, he knows it, but he can't see that every moment, all of these reactive things he does, they're about the lack of confidence. But I can see that. And I can see that because I've been through that. And I can see that because this child does things that could make another, and have made me at times, defensive or shut down, or, just feel like, well, this is just too much. This is very intense. But I have to stay vulnerable. And the only way to do that is to come from a place of love, which goes back again to the true nature of sovereignty. I remember my father told me, he was a political science major, and he told me the best government is a benevolent dictator. That always stuck with me because it's kind of extreme. It sounds really crazy, but if you had a truly benevolent leader, that person would care about everybody around them. They would still make mistakes. They would care about the well-being of the country. They would care about the people outside of the country. They would care about all of that. So I think that if our teachers could all become benevolent sovereigns, really in touch with their own loving self, that saw that every human being has a benevolent sovereign or a sovereign who's trying to sit on their own throne. And in a way, if we imagine the earth as a sphere, it's populated also by a sphere of little points of light that are sovereigns trying to take their seat. And so when we think about it that way, we can say, when I'm talking to you, Mark, it's my inner light, my loving self is trying to know yours. And I also think that this has not only an incredible impact on education and what education can be, but it also is really the most effective soothing balm for this divisiveness that everybody's identified as such a problem. Because we're all becoming individuals. That's what we're all our own kings. And if we're not taking interest in each other's kingdoms, then we're just going to grow further and further apart. It's like the image of the expanding universe. All those stars are getting lonelier and lonelier and lonelier till their light doesn't even shine on one another anymore. We have to take interest in one another.
Oh, that was really great, Jared. I like that a lot. That the theme of this discussion that we had is that finding of the sovereign. There are stages. You're the young sovereign. Then you're the one who's really dealing with the major problems in your life, but you're taking responsibility for it. And for the people that you're in charge of, the humans that are around you. And then you grow to a certain point where you're that wise king or queen. But definitely you're the wise sovereign. And it echoes that entire feeling that you're new at something, you're competitive at something, and then you're a mentor at something. And I feel that the time for that, however you can wrap it around the ideology that you're most comfortable with, I think that's the time we're talking about. I think that's the awakening that we're talking about, where men can feel comfortable being new at this, whatever this thing is that we're becoming, this new masculinity, this new identity, and be willing to fall flat on our faces in front of everyone as we're getting better. But know that at one point we are better, but we're not the best. And now we're striving for becoming the best. And then finally, once we get a handle on it, maybe we can pass that forward to the next generation. We can bring the next generation back to a space that's a little bit better. Do you like that?
Yeah, it sounds like education to me.
It sounds like education to me too. Listen, I've had a wonderful time talking to you. Now, it's hard for us to get together, but I'd like to do another one of these. We'll let our adventures and our lives take hold, but I'm sure that not just the audience, but I'm super interested in keeping in touch and knowing where this journey took you. And
Yeah.
for God's sake, record this, whatever men's group is singing, because I really, really want to hear it.
All
I
right.
want to hear I want to hear your new voice.
Oh, thank you. I'd love to share it with you. And thanks for having me. It's amazing. And I'm definitely open to visiting some more.
That's really great. I'm going to stop the podcast, but hold on for a minute because I know Annabella wants to say hi. I know some other people want to see your face.
All right.
And for once, my beard is longer than yours. So I got you on that.
Yeah.
Hold on one second. Stay tight.